So it's road cleanup day, usually sometime in spring. After the snow melts, we go up and down the road looking for what the melted snow has revealed. Okay, what do we have there? Alaska Brewery, Alaskan Pale Ale. Yeah, missed one. The topic of this video is not garbage cleanup and community service. It is... The topic is why it's incredibly important to get to know any neighborhood you plan to move into. And what does that have to do with garbage cleanup? Well, this happens to be a section of road where typically off of the left side of the road we find lots and lots of empty beer cans and bottles because it marks the distance from the paved road. Right as soon as they turn off the paved road, they crack one open. By the time they get to this part of the road, they throw it out the window.
Got one.
Okay, why didn't you put it in the bag? Another one. So we keep seeing these exact ones, and I think I know who's putting those out there. So what does this have to do with knowing your neighborhood? Well, you might not be okay with living on a road where people drive drunk on a regular basis. I'm not okay with it either. We have kids. I like to live in a place where I feel comfortable that if my kids want to ride their bikes to a neighbor's house and play, that they can do that. And in general, most of our neighbors are pretty responsible. We know exactly who the drunk drivers are. And they didn't live here when we first moved out here. If we had known that initially, maybe we would have gone somewhere else. But these are things that you're not going to be told by any realtor. These are things that you need to find out by getting your boots on the ground, talking to people, getting the real in-person intelligence. So there's this random piece of tube with something spread across it. I don't understand why this is here or why somebody would do this. If you know, please enlighten me. I've had people who moved into the neighborhood here who really like it, who quite literally judge the neighborhood by the quality of the cabins they saw on the road, by the newness of the vehicles that they saw on the road, by their initial interactions with those of us who live on the road. So these are all things that you can use. I personally don't like to judge based on vehicles because we drive pretty crappy vehicles ourselves. Your plan might be to go live out in the middle of nowhere, and okay, that's fine. You're still going to have to deal with some people, but you're not going to have to necessarily get along as part of a neighborhood. And if you live in a neighborhood with lots of people, it's not as important because if there's lots of people, there's enough people around that you're going to gravitate towards those that you're more like, and you're going to gravitate away from those that you're not so much like. But in a neighborhood of very few people, every single neighbor matters. It only takes one jerkwad to ruin a whole neighborhood.
Is an EPI one?
IPA?
IPA, yes.
Yeah. Just always when you pick them up, make sure you shake them out so you don't get
There's
yucky
nothing in there.
stuff on you.
You might be somebody who's on the other side of this whole debate here. You might be looking specifically for a rural neighborhood where you are free to drive down the road with an open container, and that might be your idea of paradise. And we have had neighbors like that in the past. There was a guy who lived out here for a while who was very open and unabashed about drinking and driving. And he'd stop and chat with us, and he'd be taking drinks in between speaking with us, and on pretty much every front, he was an excellent neighbor. Great guy, we got along really well. I just wish he hadn't been a drink driver. But that's something that he was looking forward to. He wanted to live in a place where he could go about his day and do that as if it is the most natural thing in the world. I know there's a road a couple miles north of here where there's been some drama lately. There's been a guy who's a long-standing resident of that neighborhood who drinks and drives, and there are some newcomers who are not too keen on it. Well, guess what? The guy who's been there a long time, he's got a lot of friends in the neighborhood. Even though I sympathize with the newcomers and that, yeah, I don't want to live near somebody who's driving drunk all the time, I also understand that being the newcomers always puts you at a disadvantage in these kinds of things when people start to kind of ally with this person or that person depending on their experiences.
Can I get it?
Go ahead.
Let me see back.
Somebody likes the Fireball whiskey.
Toss it in.
Put it in.
So here's a little snip from an online exchange about that particular situation. It says, his kids don't even speak to him, so he really is just a miserable drunk who thought he was going to run off a couple young outsiders moving in once he got what he needed from us. So that's a little bit more context for that story, at least from one side of it.
What you got there?
Oh, at the bottom.
Is that another Fireball whiskey or is that something else?
Don't know what that is.
I don't know.
Junk.
So yeah, when you live in a very rural area with very few neighbors, your neighbors can really make or break your success. Check out this situation here. This lady says, when I moved into my neighborhood many years ago, I was constantly harassed by a local drunk that didn't want women around. He tried scaring me off, blocking my access many different ways, shooting guns and all sorts of other passive-aggressive tactics, including threatening the rest of my neighbors if they were friendly to me. Another derelict neighbor threatened a group of women up the road, telling them they weren't wanted. He got really aggressive at different times, and one had to contact law enforcement and get a protection order. Stand your ground. You may have to show a little cray-cray sometimes, and hopefully they will back down. It's sad some Alaskans are like that. The isolation gives these idiots a sense of security, thinking they can do whatever they want. Make sure not to let your animals wander either. The guy I had problems with initially invited me to graze my horses openly on the hillside. Then a year and a half later, he got drunk and shot them both.
All right, make sure you're not dripping that on yourself.
There's
Okay?
nothing in it.
Okay.
It's blue green mud, but it doesn't have the date.
Let me see in there. On the flip side of that, we've been very fortunate in that quite a few of our current neighbors, who are some of our best neighbors, they did this exact kind of research. They came out, they met people, they talked with us, they had conversations. This has happened with quite a few neighbors, and as a result of people doing this level of diligence, we have a very, very functional neighborhood where almost all of us get along really, really well. It's not foolproof. Before we moved out here, I had patronized a local business on the road just before this one. And the guy was talking to me and saying, oh yeah, you know, it's a good neighborhood. We always help each other out and this and this and this and that. And he's like, but there's one guy you got to watch out for. You got to watch out for that Glenn. He's, you know, he started to warn us about this neighbor Glenn, who is not to be trusted. He was a real sketchy individual. Well, if you've watched our previous videos on this channel, you know that Glenn is our next door neighbor and our absolute best neighbor. Like, we could not ask for a better neighbor. He's been a great mentor and taught us a lot of things. Now, those two didn't get along, but it didn't mean that Glenn and us didn't have to get along, and it didn't mean that I didn't have to get along with that other guy that was warning me about Glenn. I was able to get along with everybody. And that kind of brings us to the number one factor of how well you're going to get on in a new neighborhood is not whether or not there's the right amount of the right kind of beer cans along the side of the road, if that's something that appeals to you or not. The main factor is going to be you and how you choose to interact with people. And if you're the kind of person that can get along with a lot of people, well, you can get along just about anywhere, and you probably will. If you're the kind of person who wants to move out to an area like this because you don't get along with a lot of people, you're going to find you still don't get along with a lot of people. Because even though it might seem like you're out here all alone, you're not alone. In fact, you're watched probably more closely than anywhere else, because when you live in a rural, sparsely populated neighborhood we pay attention to who's driving in and out because we want to know who belongs here and who doesn't. We want to know if each other's stuff is safe. We have a very effective neighborhood watch around here. So if you think that you're going to solve your social problems by moving out to the middle of nowhere, you're still going to have those same problems if that's just part of who you are. And whether or not you can change that, I don't know. That's not really my department. But I can tell you that following these principles of checking it out first, talking to people, having real conversations, finding out if this is a place where I'm going to fit in well with who's here. It's worked well for us. It's worked well for most of our neighbors. And I think it's going to continue to work well, or so I hope. Hopefully it works well for you. Here's the end result of the day. 1 mile of road equates with 1 full feed sack of mostly beer cans.
So how do you make sure that your neighbors are going to be a good fit? Well, you can't know that until you go there and meet them and find out. So, of course, rule 1, never buy sight unseen. Never buy property unless you go walk on it. But just as important as walking on it is meeting the people who live in the area, seeing what things are like. And I would say, getting a general vibe check. Trust your gut. If your gut tells you this is not the place for me, it probably isn't. If your gut tells you, hey, these people really seem to jive with me, we could maybe make it work, then that's probably a good sign too. But you can't know this without going there and finding out in person. Now, you also want to ask more people than are just in that specific neighborhood. Ask people the next neighborhood over. Maybe they have some different perspectives. Ask in town in general, wherever town is. Hey, what are things like out such and such road? Because roads definitely have their own reputations. I know my road does. I know the road up there does. Very different reputations. The road out that way has a very different reputation. And it's because these are roads with very few people on them. So the few people that live on them, their actions carry a lot more weight in determining the reputation of that area. So go in person, check it out, talk to people, have conversations, trust your gut, but also don't be surprised if people that you meet are not going to be super excited about newcomers moving in. Even the nicest of neighbors might be a little bit hesitant, but you can generally, suss that out with a conversation. So you're going to need to get along with your neighbors. Survival sometimes depends on it. But typically, people will reflect whatever you put out towards them. So if you're nice to them, they're going to be nice to you. If you come in and don't ever talk to anybody, a lot of people are going to interpret that as either acting too good for us. Maybe you're like one of those rich city people that doesn't want to associate with us country bumpkins, or something like that. Really does happen. Now, you can still do that, but still get to know your neighbors and be like, oh yeah, I just like to kind of go do my own thing, blah, blah, blah. People will respect that, but if you just straight up ignore everybody and refuse to introduce yourself, it's not going to be a good look. Hopefully you found this helpful. I've got 1 or 2 more in this series, so thanks for watching.